Hello everyone, so I know this video is probably coming a bit late. The Genshin stream was like 1 week ago, but you know, I was busy. But I still wanted to talk about the new 4.3 characters that are coming out, Navia and Chevreuse. I'm gonna try something different this time around. I'm gonna go pretty quick and I'm just gonna assume that you watched the stream or maybe other videos that just explain what Navia and Chevreuse does. I'm just gonna assume you know what the skill does, you know what the ult does, you generally know how her kit works. And we're gonna go straight into some build summaries, and I'm gonna mostly focus on team building because I think that is the most important part of when you get a character and like how they fit in the team. So first off, Navia's artifact. She's a main DPS, very simple, go attack, geo, crit. 3 main sets that I think are good. Of course, there's a new artifact set that's coming out. The summary is it gives 18% attack and 50% geo damage when you fulfill the requirements. It's her general best, but the problem with this artifact is not the artifact itself, is that the other artifact, the other healing support artifact, is kind of trash and you really don't want to get it when you farm it. It's just so gimmicky and you could just use Clam instead. So if you really like Navia and you want her best set, you can go for it, but otherwise I would suggest something else easier that you probably already have. For example, the Fontaine artifact sets. If you're thinking about using Furina with Navia, then you can use Marujushi Hunter, the Furina effect. The other choice, the elemental skill option, is not the worst thing in the world. We know that Navia's most of her damage is going to be from her skill, and this just gives elemental skill damage. And I think it would be pretty funny to use this artifact set just to get the biggest number out of her E. The problem with this set is that even though most of her damage is coming from her E, there is a significant amount of damage that comes from her burst and normal attacks, so you don't really get the full buff. Otherwise, just go classic 2-piece. Next, let's go on to weapons. I think her signature is the best by far just because of drip. It's an axe instead of a claymore, and it fits her color scheme. Like, it looks amazing. Other than drip though, it generally just gives 20% attack, 36% skill damage on its special passive, and it gives crit rate. The stats are fine and it's generally going to be one of her best, but the thing is that I don't think it's worth it if you're going to talk about strength wise, because Serpent Spine exists. This thing, I don't know why this exists as a 4-star battle pass weapon. It just gives crit rate and tons of damage bonus. The only thing about it, it's kind of cringe and annoying to just wait in the chamber to stack its damage bonus, but because it's so strong, it kind of devalues the axe a bit if we're going to talk about strength. As far as all the other 5-star weapons, they're cool stat sticks. I mean, sure, you can go ahead and use it if you want. Moving on to some 4 stars, I think the best free-to-play weapon is the new free-to-play weapon that's coming in 4.3. It is the Melusine Claymore. It gives plenty of attack percent and gives energy recharge. It is great, but you better get questing and help those Melusines, otherwise you aren't going to get the full bonuses. And lastly, honorable mention, Sacrificial Greatsword. I'm not sure if it will actually be one of her best, just because stat wise you are kind of losing, just like for example attack percent, but I think it's cool that we actually have a use for Sacrificial Greatsword, because getting a reset on a skill, Navia skill, that actually is a main source of her damage, it's really cool. And theoretically, if you're able to proc it reliably, just getting the extra E could actually be a greater DPS gain than just getting stats, because you just get an extra E. The thing is that if you don't have R5, just please don't use it. The chance of getting that proc if you're not R5 is so low, I don't think it's worth it. Just use something else. Finally, we get into teams. Now, I think that the 2 main teams that you're going to have are Navia with another Geo character, double Geo, and then just 2 random flex characters. Hopefully these 2 characters synergize well with each other. The other one is just Navia with just 3 flex characters, just random elements, go. And I think this highlights something about Navia that is both a strength but also kind of a curse. She's very flexible because you can kind of just plop her down, put 3 or 2 other units that work well together, and she will work and that team will be pretty good. So in a way, she's very flexible. The thing is that that's also kind of a problem where Navia just kind of exists while the other 3 characters work well together. So she's just kind of there as a bystander in a way. So to go over some team building ideas and thinking, I sorted all the characters by their element in this tier list maker. So we can first go over the Geo slot that you could possibly use. I think the 4 that you possibly use are these 4 right here: Ningguang, Albedo, Noelle, Zhongli. Noelle and Ningguang are kind of similar in the sense where they serve as the Geo for a dual DPS comp, which Navia kind of allows because of her skill CD, her 2 usage, and her short uptime, which allows kind of 2 carries to exist in a team. I don't think they're the best though, so we can just go Albedo or Zhongli support. These characters are kind of self-explanatory, give some geo particles, one gives shield, one gives damage. I prefer Zhongli. I think he'll probably be the best just to give that shield. So then with your 2 flex characters, what could you possibly use? Well, these 2 flex characters should make some sense of each other. We're gonna ignore Animo. I don't think you ever pick an Animo unit. You have a Geo character on your team, and I don't think you ever pick a Cryo unit as well. If you try to freeze, Geo will break the freeze, so freeze is useless, and so the only other reaction that's useful is melt. And do you really want to melt with like Rosaria, Shangling? I don't think so. I don't think it works. So I'm just gonna ignore Cryo units. I don't think any Cryo units are gonna be useful here. So for a 2 unit core, that's all we have left are Pyro, Electro, and Hydro. And double Hydro works. This is a competent team. You could go Electro charge with Fischl. You could go double Pyro with Shangling Bennett. Stuff like this. Make sure you have like a 2 unit that actually makes sense and is pretty strong. And generally, you can kind of put anything that you want in here, and it will probably be a strong team. You can even put like, for example, I don't know, this might actually work as well. Kind of a dual carry set with Raiden Navia. So in that way, she can be very flexible because you can kind of just put whatever you want. Just make sure like I said, those characters actually do some damage and kind of synergize well with each other. And they don't necessarily have to do 2 different elements to take advantage of her passive, just because sure you lose 20% attack, but you gain a better synergy, so that will make up for your 20% attack, so you don't have to worry about maximizing your passive. It's not that bad. But you don't necessarily need to have a Geo character. You can just go 3 flex units, and now you have a 3 unit core that could pair up with Navia. This is where Dendro can come in. You can just play like Hyper Bloom core, boom, and this team is functional. I know it's just kind of Hyper Bloom plus Navia, which is kind of shows like the flaw of her flexibility. Like, is this really a Navia team? You just have Hyper Bloom doing its work. Like, Navia doesn't have to be here, or it could be what, Burgeon. We put in Toma. Sure, like Burgeon, Hyper Bloom, yeah, it's there, and this team will be strong. Is it actually a Navia team? Well, debatable. So for that reason, I'm not gonna focus too much on Dendro. Dendro works just because their 3 unit cores work by themselves. So what other 3 units can we possibly put in? Well, it's kind of similar to the 2 units that I was demonstrating. You could try to go like an Electro charged, that works. You can try out a double Pyro with some Vaporize because you have Bennett, Shangling. Then what's your 4th slot? Well, I guess you could go Overload as well. This probably works. Well, not Kuki, but probably Fischl. Overload can work. Probably Vaporize is good as well, especially Furina. Furina buffs all the damage dealers on this team and does deal damage herself. So yeah, those are pretty much my ideas of Navia's team building. As you can see, the examples I put here are actually the ones that I think are the best for these structures. Yes, it's Bennett Shangling, but like I said, that's kind of the flaw of her quote-unquote flexibility, is that she doesn't really have characters that are highly synergistic with her. You just kind of use characters that work well with themselves, and then you just plop Navia down and she can kind of do her own thing, which is kind of inherent to her element because she's Geo, but she's kind of anti-Geo, and like it really doesn't matter if she's Geo or not. She just does damage herself. She's like neutral element. She basically has no element. And I just wanted to add one thing on Furina specifically. Furina works well with her because Furina kind of works well with most units in this game, like to a point, but I don't think her synergy is that good when compared to other units. Number one, as a Fontaine character, she actually doesn't have any HP draining in her kit, so she can't self-synergize with Furina. And number two, the healing option is pretty much only Bennett. You aren't using Jean because it's Animo. Baiju's kind of mad because Dendro Geo is kind of not that highly synergistic. What I'm trying to say is that there really isn't a good pair other than Bennett for a healer slot, and with Bennett it's kind of wonky to make sure your team is healed. So who knows, maybe there will be a future character that is released that could be a Geo character that also heals and works well with Furina. Maybe Chiori, she looks Geo enough, you know. Okay, on to Chevreuse. So I think this character is quite interesting because it is Hoyo's attempt to try to bring Overload team centric comps up to the level of other comps. I don't think they'll be good, but I think that she will potentially bring them up to par because I don't think Overload centric teams, I should say, are the best. So as a 4-star, we're going to just quickly go over Constellations. So C1 gives 6 energy for the active character when they trigger Overload. When you get C2, when you hold her E, it kind of has 2 extra hits set in for some extra power application. C3 level skill. C4, when you use your burst, your hold skill has no cooldown for 6 seconds or after you perform 2 hold skills. So you can kind of burst 2 hold skills instantly and boom, That's kind of like free damage if you build her DPS. C5 gives some burst levels, and then C6 is the big one. When your character is healed by a skill, every time it like ticks, you gain 20% Electro and Pyro damage bonus for 8 seconds, and it stacks for 3 times, so you get 60% Electro and Pyro damage bonus. In addition to that, after her skill duration healing ends, she heals the whole team. So what I think about these constellations, I think C0 is just fine because her Z0 kit innately has the Pyro and Electro shred. Obviously, if you get C6, it kind of brings her to the level of Kazuha, because in those teams she's kind of replacing the role of Kazuha. So yes, once she gets C6, just buff wise, she will match some earlier constellations. I think C4 has the potential if you're going to run her as a sub DPS, and I'll talk more about that later. I don't know if this is actually useful. Maybe some theory crafter will figure out, oh, this extra power application is useful. Right now I can't think of anything, and C1 is extra energy for active characters. Nice. So unfortunately, ideally you have to aim for C6 because 60% Pyro and Electro damage bonus to your team is kind of big. As for playstyles and builds, so I think that the most common and probably better way of building her is just go full support. She doesn't really need ER. Her burst just does damage. You can just kind of ignore it. Just go full HP, aim for 40k HP because you want to maximize her attack percent buff. You can sub in a crit circlet if you use Favonius, and you should probably use Favonius. Now there's also potential that you might want to use a healing bonus circlet. So I just did the calculation for a 40k HP Chevreuse, and you get 2,484 healing ticks at talent level 10. This is not including healing bonus. So if you kind of think about it, if you include healing bonus, she pretty much heals like Kuki, and I find Kuki heals perfectly fine. So with a healing bonus circlet, you could just use Chevreuse as your healer and you don't have to use another healer. Perhaps this probably won't be that useful, but you know, maybe it's a possibility. As for builds, I don't think she really has a 4 set that she can actually use to support the team. I guess you could use Noblesse, which I probably should have shown here, but oh, whatever. So I guess Noblesse is fine. You're gonna have to want a little bit of ER for your ult, but if you have another power character, which you probably should have another power character, you should be fine. Otherwise, some 2-piece HP is good, because if you're gonna go full support, you should probably aim for that 40k HP. As for weapons, I think you should just go Favonius every single time. Favonius is strong, Favonius is good. Favj all the way. I guess one alternative is this Rightful Reward weapon. This weapon I believe is Defontaine craftable, and it gives HP percent, so that's pretty nice. And it gives energy to Chevreuse herself. Now, is this better than the Favonius passive? I don't think so, so that's why I think Favonius is better. But I think this is also usable and pretty viable. Now the other build that I think actually has potential is just go full DPS, attack, power, crit. I know it's kind of memey, but if you have C4, you get those 2 instant hold skills. So that's like 1000% multiplier instantly right there. So you could take advantage of her fairly high multiplier just generally. Her skill has like 500, 600. Her ult also has 500, 600. And her buffs buff Electro and Pyro damage after overload, so if you build her damage, she kind of takes advantage of her own buffs. Some artifact sets you can consider: Crimson Witch of Flints. I think the 4 set is actually like you can actually use it on Chevreuse, which might be interesting. You can cook something with this. Another choice, skill damage. She with C4 does potentially a lot of skill damage, so you can kind of meme around with this. Otherwise, no. Gladiator for a 2-piece attack, mix some 2 pieces around. For weapons, just pick some damage spear. Like, you see, if you have one of these stat sticks, you can choose your favorite stat stick. Some damage, or you can just stick with Favonius. One recommendation I guess I could give is this Missive Wind Spear. This is a free-to-play weapon and it looks good. Attack percent, you can use the attack percent EM from here. I mean, it looks fine. That's a good damage weapon you can use. Lastly, let's talk about team building for Chevreuse. I think there are, again, 2 team structures that we can go with. I think we can go with 3 Pyro, 1 Electro with Chevreuse, or 2 Pyro, 2 Electro. Example teams are shown. Now you might be wondering, why do we not have 1 Pyro, 3 Electro? That's like the 3rd combination left. Well, the reason is because in order to take advantage of Chevreuse's buff, which is basically the entire kit, the overload thingy, you know, the overload gimmick, well, you need to proc overload pretty much once every 6 seconds. But if you have 3 Electro and 1 Pyro and she's the only Pyro character, it's not going to be enough. Her skill and ult are longer than those 6 seconds. You can't proc overload enough just by herself. You're gonna have 3 Electro and you need the Pyro to proc the overload. She's not gonna have enough every 6 seconds. So just her being the solo Pyro is not gonna work. So we end up with these 2 combinations. Now, choosing characters for a Chevreuse team is really easy. You don't want any of these elements. Simple. You want Pyro and Electro, and do not try to tell me, oh, let me cook something with another element. No, please don't. Just stick with Pyro and Electro, please. Stick with your kit. So what do we have? Well, like I said, 3 Pyro, 1 Electro, or we can go 2 Electro. So I think there are 2 kind of ways to look at this. One is she kind of fits the role of Kazuo in some like overload teams, and I think the best example to show is kind of the only overload centric team that is actually like quote unquote good, and that would be Raiden Hyper. So Raiden Hyper carry is typically these 4 units. You can sub out Sara for official if you want, but this is an overload centric team. Like sure, you buff Raiden and that's like a good amount of your damage, but overload is also a central part of the damage from just Kazuo swirling. So if we want to think about 2 Electro, 2 Pyro, I think the perfect example is, well, she kind of fits the role of Kazuo. She gives resistance shred on her own, so she kind of has VV, Viridescent Venerer, in her base kit. Now she is missing the damage bonus that Kazuo gives, but if you have C6, she'll match that damage bonus, and actually like she gives more damage bonus. So yeah, at C0 she's kind of like a side grade, a little bit of a downgrade. At C6, the buff itself is an upgrade, and this is where you get like a team comp where you have Chevreuse. It's overload centric, but you don't necessarily focus on the overload. You kind of focus on buffing your damage dealers like Kazuo would do in the slot. The one thing that we're missing from replacing Kazuo is, yes, if you get C6, her buff technically is better, but you're losing, number 1, just damage from Kazuo himself. He does swirls, overloads, he does a significant amount of damage, and you're losing the grouping because overload knocks enemies away. So ideally, if you run this comp, you're gonna have to focus on like some single target or whatever. Now for the other team comp, triple Pyro, 1 Electro. First thing we can choose just like our other 2 Pyro characters. I think a no-brainer is just these 2, because if we think about duo Pyro characters, this is probably the thing you think of. There's gonna be probably the best slot for your other Pyro characters. Now you could focus on another carry. Let's just say maybe Linny in Bennett, or maybe Klee in Bennett, maybe even Yoimiya in Bennett, and I think those could work. My worry is that will that overload centric team with Chevreuse be better than what they already have? I'm not sure about that, which is why I will kind of lean toward the tried and tested and true Bennett Xiangling. It will just work by itself. I don't really have to worry about it. And of course, just the Electro slot probably is going to be official. I think you kind of just forget about AoE with an overload centric team. Like if you put Beto, your enemies are flying all over the place, so you kind of just focus on single target. Maybe you can put Raiden in here as well. So yeah, that's pretty much Chevreuse team building. I think there are definitely some areas where you could cook up some interesting combinations of Pyro and Electro units that I didn't really think of. I kind of just defaulted on Bennett Xiangling at the end there. It's just, I don't know, just the easiest thing to think about. And I do struggle to see if other Pyro carries could utilize Chevreuse better, because I think most of the buffing that I could see work is actually buffing Electro carries. But who knows, maybe I'm wrong. I think this character has quite a lot of potential, and I think needs quite a bit of testing and perhaps future characters that could come out. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to go over for these new 4.3 characters. So you may be wondering, why is there a photo of Cloud Retainer at the end of the document talking about Navia and Chevreuse? Well, simple. I like Cloud Retainer. I think she looks really cool, and I would be elated, and I hope that she becomes a playable character sometime in the future. Who knows? Anyway, that's it.